Hello guys, Kinglis here from the One Plus Armory here. Today I'm going to be explaining to you a little bit about gripping your sword and how should you really hold your sword. So this fundamentally really depends on the type of sword that you have. So for example, if you are going to be having an earlier century sword, you're most likely either going to be doing a hammer grip or actually no, let me grab my swords. Alright, cool, I'm back with swords. So let's just say if we are going to go with let's just say we're going to go with a little bit of an earlier 10th century sword. Let's just say we're going to have like an arming sword. Most of the time, you're going to probably find yourself either hammer gripping it, which is of course usually your hand's going to be holding it out. Your sword is most likely going to be quite perpendicular to your sword. Now, the reason why this is actually quite effective is that you get really good control, really good chop with it. It's a very, very choppy kind of handle. Now, with this, you are able to, of course, parry really well because you have a really good posture in terms of receiving the blow. Let's just say if a sword is going to hit one part, you will receive that really well. Even in the weak of your sword, you can still parry quite nicely. After, of course, delivering the parry, you can then do whatever you need with still a sufficient amount of force to it without overswinging. So, hammer grip is a very common one that I use, especially when I'm using something like a basket hill. Second is that you can also do a handshake grip. Now, handshake grip, instead of having the sword 90 degrees, it's kind of like a 45, and you're literally doing a handshake. If you look at my hand here, a hammer grip, you're literally choking on the sword. So like that. And if you're hammering grip it, handshake grip, then you see that my thumb and the rest of my hand kind of create a V. And you can still see a bit of your grip, and that will create your handshake grip. This is amazing because you get really good reach. So if you have a very light sword, then you could, let's just say, you have a relatively light sword that's like a cutlass, you could either hammer or handshake it. And of course, this will deliver really nice turn of the hand, what we call moulinet, or what we call a stramazone, however you want to call it, but it is a cut to your wrist. It's fantastic. Can you do that with a hammer grip? Kind of. You have to loosen your hand. Eventually you develop that, and I use a lot of the handshake grip if I really want more reach, and I kind of want to test the reach. I do swap between hammer, handshake, and guard in terms of when I'm fencing. It depends what it really used for. Do you want to really get more distance, or do you want to get in for more good parry? So it's very easy to just switch. So hammer, handshake, hammer, handshake. Then this, you can still do a lot of things with it. So, and then of course, when it comes to later 10th century, let's just say any sword that have almost like a little ring here, this, or even like a later century period rapier, or anything that's, well, has more hand protection, later on around as early as the 14th century, you will find swords that have this little ring here. And that is, well, it's called a sword ring or a finger ring or whatever you want to call it. It's just a little bit extra defense. If you are getting hit on the finger, at least you have some protection there. And so what happens is then people start doing what they call fingering the sword, indexing the sword, or at least it gives you a much better control. And this naturally leads to almost like a balance between, now, you see how my hand is still choking in the grip? This is kind of between of the hammer and kind of a handshake. And so I use this the most just because, well, I do bottle mix. So that's how it goes. Italian version, you will find a lot of these, and you find a lot of the 15th, 16th century, well, of course, even 14th or the 17th century will be using this, only if you have that ring. So let's just say, if you're in a game, in your life and death, and you really have to use it, would I put my finger over this? Yes, because I get much better control. If I lose an index, but I get better control of my sword, I'd rather trade a little bit more dexterity and kind of risk my finger. And to be honest, if my hand is here, finger is here, and finger is here, Do I lose one over faster than the other? Perhaps. Not really. Most of the time I get hit in the hand is on the side anyway. Oh, this sword is kind of sharp. In that case, on the side anyway, so I'd rather get more technique based than just chomp, chomp, chomp. So that's one. You will find this grip very handy if your sword is a little heavy, and this will start delivering what I call, actually a lot of people actually call it too, it's the point of contact. Your point of contact when you're hammering and handshake, that's one point of contact because your hilt, which is your handle assembly, is touching your sword. This is just I'm contacting on the handle. When I'm contacting on another part of the hilt, which is the crossguard, now that's 2 point of contact. What does it mean? I get more control of my blade, and you can get much tighter cut, much better result in terms of what you can and cannot do because you're communicating with your sword at a much deeper level. So that's one. And so later on, what happened is that let's just say, great, I have a very light sword. What do I do with it? I fingered the sword already. What else can I do? So later on in the period, you are going to be finding sources that tells that you're going to put more finger into your card. So if I can put 1 finger, can I put 2 finger in it? Absolutely. So later on century, we are going to be finding, actually, 1 second. Cool, I'm back. Okay, so later on in the period century, you're going to be finding swords that has a much more complex hilt, or sometimes you get an entire bowl of defense in there, meaning you kind of look like you have a rice bowl stuck in your crossguard, and it's fantastic, it's cheating. And it's a very cool, gentlemanly thing. If you are in a life and death situation, would I want more handguard? Yes, please, I want a whole finger handguard if I can. Or if I can, I'll just wear a gauntlet when I fight, that's even better. So what happened is that instead of putting 1 finger in your handguard, if you do 2, you see how my hand changed from exposing this much of my hand? If I shove more hand into my crossguard, I just save my hand that much. And with this, you get a much better control. So this would be, you see the time century, hammer, handshake, finger, more finger. You notice that the sword is from being a very choppy object, become a very thrust-centric object. And we will see that as time goes on. We're talking about like hundreds of years in between. Sometimes you can still see them using it very similarly. And it just depends on the sword, depends on the lifestyle, and what you are using it for. If you're in a war situation where your sword is like a contractor grade thick sword, let's say a really big sword, these both are 15th and 17th century swords. Actually, I think this is almost 18th century. But what it means is that depending on the sword that you have, in the period that you're in and the design of the sword, you will find yourself that you might go back into the hammer grip in a very late century because it depends. What are you actually using it for? Is it a boarding sword cutlass like this one? Or are you having a duel and you just want to maximize your reach as much as you can? Depends. So getting into it is that the next grip you could do is that after you either your finger, 1 finger, or 2 finger, you could brace your pommel onto your wrist. Now this gives you really good control. This will most likely give you the maximum reach because now my sword is literally straight. And I'm not putting any strain into my hand. If I hammer grip, do that, that's a lot of strain right here. You see how much my bone fluctuates, right? But if I do that, it's much more relaxed. Hammer, you see that crazy bone? And that. My hand is much more relaxed. And I put my opponent right at my maximum reach. So now, it's fantastic. You could also actually put your finger up here. So the sword itself, there's a ricasso. That's called ricasso. It's a very not sharp part of your blade for your finger to go in. You could put, at the back of your ricasso, you could put your thumb right there. And that gives you even more control. I often do this when I'm sparring because I find myself using the thumb pushing onto your blade. And that will develop into something like later on period where I have more swords. Where if you have like A saber. So this is actually a World War I, I think, World War I antique. And we will find that a saber, we are going to go back into a handshake grip because I can't really put my finger on anything. So handshake grip, but to get that 3-point of control, my thumb will be putting onto the back of the handle. A lot of times later on, saber will have the back of the, well, actually that whole thing is called pommel. It's kind of weird. It's not just that's a pommel, the whole thing is a pommel. And that's actually textures for you to put your thumb at the back. Now this gives you really, really good control. So what happened later on? Well, people start developing hilts that are slightly more curved, and we can see this is slightly developing that little curve at the end because you are able to hold the sword like that at the back of the sword. Isn't this cool? That early set, I actually don't have a Viking sword because I can't show you, but actually I have my Cathburger. I can probably show you there. Let me put this back because that's an antique. Sorry guys, a little quick cut in here. Now a little thing about is that I totally glazed over the point why this little bit of the edge of the pommel or the end of the handle is slightly curved. We're gonna start seeing a lot of military saber. I think 1740s and something like that, or even Indian sabers later on. And of course, well, commonly you found Polish saber and stuff like that, right? They will have a more curve to the end. So let's just say, well, the hilt is relatively straight here, then how does the curve matter? Well, if your hand is holding here, the end of your pinky will be curved. So it will just rotate your hand a little bit more. So then if you have your sword, if you're choking on the front, it's relatively straight. And then when you're back, then when you're holding the back of your sword right here, it's going to be curved. Even the smaller curve right here, it will make my hand, instead of holding it straight, it will just be more off like that. Now, what's the benefit of actually holding the back of your sword, let's say here, compared to in front of your sword? Because you get really good control parry in the front. Yes, when you have to parry it, bring it to the front. When you need to do rotational cut, then these are really good for doing bolognese, especially when you're cutting around your body and stuff like that. Then these curved cuts became very, very useful in terms of what you have to do, because now you have the control of your sword with the crossguard, so your hand doesn't slip away. With that, you get really fast cuts, and you can just kind of swing your sword around. It's the cut of the, so you can cut it with your hand, cut it with your elbow, or even with your entire body if you really have to, because those are the characteristic of really, well, heavy swords, really cutty sword, and these are fantastic for cutting. And when you need point control, bring your sword back in, put your thumb in the back, then you can get really, really good point control. When you need to cut, just swing the sword around and your hand will eventually go into the back guard. So that is why it's very important to have, at least to me, is some part that is so relatively straight and some part that if you can, even if it's not curved like that, like the Cathburger that I've shown, where the pommel actually flares out, then you get to do those really big cuts and not lose your sword. And when you need to deliver a really good point, then you can. So let's just say, can I still deliver a really good point if I have a sword that piston grip? Sword fencing. Well, that's exactly what it's made for. You're literally holding a sword like a piston, like that. Like if I hold my sword like that, of course that's not point control, but can you slash really well with it? Doubt it. Well, then again, I don't know, I don't do sword fencing. But if I have a sword like that, like an actual real sword that I could hammer grip, handshake grip, and also hold it by the pommel, then these are fantastic because they give you such high variety in terms of what you can do the sword for. And once you're fighting someone, the more variety, the more surprises you can get in there that your technique will allow you to do, why not? It just makes you more of a versatile fighter. Great, so I'm going to be showing Cathburger right now. Cathburger is a 16th century war sword, mainly used by Landsknecht, which they are strapped here, very closely knit fighting. So, as you can see, massive pommel. You could actually hold the pommel very much like that to get even more reach. Now, what happened is that even in the 16th century, hammer grip, handshake grip, or back of the thumb on the blade. So then we are able to do a very classic German technique where we can actually hit by rotating our hand like a helicopter. So it's great once you hit, you bind, and then you swap to the other side to cut him. Fantastic. So even early, let's just say Viking sword, 16th century, and even let's say that sword right there, which is the 18th century, we're talking like 400 or even 600 years in development, you can still hold your sword by the pommel. And so what does it mean? I suppose it really depends on your fighting style and depending on how do you actually want to use your sword. Because it all really goes back into the fundamental of what is really comfortable for you. Now, of course, it depends on the style that you're going to be learning from. So let's just say we're going to be going with, let's say, rapier. Because now, let's just say we're going to focus on rapier as the most versatility in terms of all these swords because there's so much things to play with. It's such a very simple guard. So I'm gonna stick with this one. I was gonna play with another one because the black is kind of hard to see. So I could be holding like this, or I could be holding like that. That gives me maximum reach. Sometimes people actually can call this like a pistol grip because I'm literally holding onto it as if I'm pressing the trigger. So that's the classic pistol grip. So actually, I think there's actually different variation of pistol grips, but I'm going to use this one for now. It's, do you need a specialized hilt, like a curved hilt? I guess like the Star Wars, like Count Dooku, or like, actually his saber is really cool. Like his lightsaber, Count Dooku, was like a little curve, like a banana. Or, let's just say sport fencing. Do you need a specialized sword where you literally your handle is like 90 degrees and you can literally hold it like that? Like, do you really need that from here all the way to here? Now, what happened is you lose the flexibility in sort of, can you hammer, can you handshake, can you finger, can you double finger? You lose that versatility because now that one sword is only very specific for that one thing. It's up to you. If you find that, no, that's the only sword I need and I don't need anything else, great, go for it. I have found a sword that I like and it goes with a finger grip, and that works for me. So let's just say, well, okay, fine, you convinced me. Let's go with a straight handle. I don't like the finger. It's still on an angle. And that's, okay, I get it, but it's still on a straight. What can I do? You could also do something called T-bow grip, or you can actually do a pommel grip. I'm going to show you now. So T-bow grip, what happens is that you're going to be on the front of your sword. So there's always a front, outside and the inside, because your hand, if you look at it, your handle goes here, right? And majority of my hand, it's on the outside, where it's the meaty side, where this is I only have the thumb and a little bit of the back of my thumb. But here is literally all the back of the rest of my hand, essentially. So I'm going to just finger your sword first, and then instead of putting your thumb in the back, so from here, we're going to be moving the thumb also on the same side of the finger. So meaning that if I look at it, my hand is like this. So I'm going to show you again. So that's actually, I think I can show you on a better if I go on this side. So my finger is on the inside. So I'm going to move it and I'm going to put it right there. One more time. From here, I'm going to do that. So now that is how I'm going to be holding my sword. And we see that remember how I was talking about the handshake where the V is here? It's right here at the crowns, at the crossguard. Now my V, it's at the profile side. So that's my V. So that could be another excellent grip for you to use to get really good point control. And your majority of your sword will be covering by your guard. This is a very typical, or at least a very good grip for stuff like rapier. When you are going into rapier system, where you're keeping your sword very, very tight, very, very straight, and when you get your sword knocked over, you can just come right back because it's very good point control. You can still cut. Just move your thumb back and you can still go back to cutting. And then you can just go back to that guard. It's not that hard at all. Or if you're still in the T-bow guard, once again, this guard is called T-bow guard. T-bow guard, you can still cut really well. You can still cut. Actually, not really well, but you can still cut, let's just say. But it's really not bad moving your thumb back, come on. So there's that. And then you could oversize and cheat it by holding your sword with just the pommel. That's why pommels are thick. You can do it in longsword treatises. People can just throw their longsword to get maximum reach. Rapier as well. If you're really fighting, you need that extra length because you kind of know your opponent distance. You can just hit, and then suddenly it's bam, maximum range. If you need to do it, you have to do it. But if you do that, if your sword gets knocked away, it's kind of hard to retreat your sword because they're heavy. So now let's just say which one are more effective in terms of fighting. Is the piston grip useful, which essentially your sword is very, very straight out, or should I go with finger over, or should I go with handshake grip? I say that once again it all depends. So I'm gonna say we are gonna be delivering either one, a good cut, or either two, really good thrust. But in this context, let's just say both, and let's just put parry into it. So let's just say, let's put it defensive away, do the attack first. Attack-wise, I personally would still do a fingering. Subjective, guys. I like fingering my sword, okay? So what happens is I can still parry really effectively. Parry, and I can still thrust, and I can still attack, parry, attack. It's really good. Can I have the same nimbleness in this? Well, if you're using a tremendously light sword, which is, let's say a sword under 1,000 grams. This one I think is about 600, 700, something like that, and it's a really, really nimble sword, then I would do it. But let's just say if you only need to do, let's say, sport fencing, like a really light attack, or you only need to do thrust, then yes, you probably want to just piston grip it and just poke him, because as long as you wind and bind, collect his sword, meaning attacking his sword or parrying away with a really simple circular parry for you to do a thrust, parry, thrust, then yeah, I don't see, then that's a very thrust-centric kind of thing. Can you still cut with a piston grip? You will find yourself in the cutting department, it's going to be less. So two things. If someone is wearing modern day t-shirt like me right now, yeah, any cut's probably gonna get through them. Would it disable them? Probably not. Muscles are actually really good to like defend yourself. Even if you get a rib to the side, you're probably not gonna just kill someone right off. Unless of course you get a wrist, tendon, and everything else in between, or you get them in the throat, in the eye, and everything else. There has been many accounts where people survive cuts, thrust around the head area. So if you want to deliver a decisive, just single cut to it, a piston grip would actually not be the best thing because you're kind of weak unless you have a lot of point of contact to your sword. Once again, it depends. The point of contact. If I have 3 point of contact, which is handle, hilt, and pommel, even a piston grip, I can do really good cut to really emphasize on it. If you were to do that, and the strength of your cut matter, yes, you can piston grip, but you really should put your body into it. Now, that's by rotating your hips. If you rotate your hip, that's already, I'm not going to move my sword, I'm going to hold my sword. If I'm rotating my hip, I'm already cutting someone. And if you rotate the ball of your feet while you do your hip, you get even more cut. So what does it mean? Well, it means that with not a lot of movement, you can just cut someone down. Looks weird, but can you do it? Yes. And is it useful? Yes. I do it in sparring all the time, which is when you void someone by bringing, let's just say I'm standing here, I'm going to move my hip back. That's already defensive action. So my body's here, move your hip back, that's defensive action for me to deliver a cut. It's quite effective. So let's just say if sport fencing wise, well, I don't do sport fencing, I cannot comment, but it's a very clean, simple touch system, then yes, piston grip is amazing. Let's just say it's in LARP context. LARP is going to be something that's like you have to do very light touch, and that's good to go because you don't want to hurt your opponent, and it's just to register point or like 1 damage, 2 damage, I don't know what it is. Then yes, piston grip is amazing because you can keep your opponent at bay amazingly well. If he does chomp on your sword really hard, they're let's say LARP-wise, they're all foam sword anyway. I hope foam. And they're not using steel sword anymore. I don't know what it developed into. But if you're using foam sword, then yes, there's barely any weight to the sword anyway. Then you can easily, let's say he's going to try to disengage by dropping your sword or going over your sword or just by moving your sword around in a very tight manner and then just hit him. Or you can just retreat and whack him. If you can just do a very tight whack, very light one, even with a sharp sword getting to the face area or the hand area, even a very tight whack, it's very effective. Only if light cuts are valid and are allowed. Would I use it for actual martial contacts? I would use it to set up for a thrust, because this type parry type, I can just tightly move my sword away and not having to get harassed. My hand is still very covered by the handguard, and after I'm good, then I can just go for a thrust. Go for a thrust. It's very, very effective because I don't have big motion running around. So yeah, once again, it is the different type of guard. We have hammer grip, which is amazing at chopping things. Handshake grip, which is still really good at chopping things, but with more distance, and you do lose a little bit. Now this goes into thrusting. To develop on your thrusting, now you have finger in the sword. This is really good at thrusting. And getting into the T-bow guard, getting into the pommel grip, these are later century where they are very thrusty. And so to get a point done is, if you want to just touch your opponent with your sword, yeah, definitely. As maximum reach. If you want to get a good cut, then you want a little bit in between, whereas between the hammer and a bit of that skin cut, or you want to just thrust. So once again, I do hope that answered your question. And so in conclusion, look at what sword you're holding right now and how many point of contact can you get your hand to your sword. Are you only allowed to do a hammer grip? Well, I suppose that's it. Then can you handle, let's just say, here, if I'm going to have a sword that I can only hammer grip, to get more point of contact, you want to do a handshake where your pommel, a lot of them actually have a little rounded part here for you to rest your hand on. Can you get a second point of contact? Or later on period, can you even, let's just say there's a ring, you cannot finger it, then that's it. I would say, grab your sword, play around with it, how much contact can you get? How much strength can you get from it? Another good exercise that you can do is hold your sword out and get your friend to push onto it and go down as you go. If you're going to push onto it on the top. So sword have the attacking part, which is the top part, and the lower half is the defending part. Closer you get to your hand, the more defense you can get. Or you can do it by yourself. Use the other hand, push it back. Do you have good control? Good. Then again, that case, that is suffice. But if you're holding it and you already have really bad control, then you may want to get more point of contact. And ideally, you want to be so good that you can just push on a sword and it's really, really stiff in a reasonable amount. The idea is that more point of control would give you more strong of your sword, which is instead of just half, maybe you can get up to 3/4. Depending on the sword, depending on the profile, I find the more stronger the sword, the better, as long as it's light enough for you to fence in and properly fight. If you get a sword so strong that you have trouble lifting and just having to really rail on it, then in that case, you're going to be at a disadvantage with more defensive capability. Then in that case, now we're going to move into footwork, but that's a completely different thing. So once again, I do hope this video helped in terms of determining what your grip is for your weapon. Until next time, we're going to be talking about probably more about swords and stuff like that. But yeah, until next time, see you then.